Hello, Governor. So, today we are going to finish discussing the governor before we move on to the rest of the executive branch. Of course, the rest of the executive branch being the other five elected officials that we will talk about later. But for now, let's talk about the powers of the governor because we've gone through the line of succession, all the things you have to have or do to become governor, and what can get you ousted from the governorship. But what we haven't talked about is probably the most important, and that is what they actually do. So today we are starting off with that exact topic. What actually is the power that the governor has, or what are the powers that the governor has? There's five categories that we're going to talk about today, and don't worry, we're spending the entire day on one slide. You're welcome, I think. But anyway, if I were you, I would either treat this down a page of notes as each box is a heading, like a subheading for that page of notes, or if you want to actually do the mind map style, you can do like it is down here and have the little webby thing with boxes. Either way, it's up to you. These are the powers of the governor. It starts with the legislative power, right? So legislative power is something that you should understand intuitively. Not really. It shouldn't be your intuition. It should be the fact that we spent the last like 2 or 3 weeks prior to the election. In other words, like before the election unit, we talked about the legislative branch because you guys actually used some legislative powers and made laws. So you should know the governor does not make laws. Governor does not make laws. But he has some power in the legislative process. One of those things that he has is the power to recommend laws, right? So it's actually the House of Representatives and the Senate, which are all part of the Missouri General Assembly, who create the laws themselves. But the governor can call up, like let's say that it's a Republican governor and a Republican House of Representatives. He can call up the Speaker of the House or the party leader and say, hey, here's this thing I would like all of the state workers in Missouri to get a 2% raise, and I want you to make that happen, pass the bill. And they could say no, but he can suggest it, right? And so suggesting or recommending laws is actually a big thing that the government, or the governor, excuse me, obviously it's all government, but that the governor is a part of. One of the probably most important laws that he suggests every year is one that I guess that 2% raise could be part of, and that is the budget. So technically the House of Representatives is in charge of the budget, but the governor almost always will send his recommended budget. Like, this is what I want to get done, and here's how much money I need to do it. Because remember, he's in charge of executing those laws. And we'll get to that with all these other boxes. The other thing that is kind of the obvious one is once a bill does go through the General Assembly, it ends up on his desk, right? And at that point, he can either sign that bill or veto that bill. Now, two kinds of veto, right? We studied this already too. He can actually just straight up no, veto it, or he can just leave it sitting on his desk and pocket veto, essentially just not ever signing it, and therefore it doesn't go through, right? Either way, the legislative branch would then have a chance at overriding his veto, but it's relatively hard to do, although it has happened several times in Missouri. The final power of the governor is one that we saw most recently, I think it was 2018, when Noranda shut down and then eventually reopened as magnitude 7 metals. After the shutdown, when New Madrid County was experiencing just crazy outflow of people and money, especially the northern end of the county, up by New Madrid, like the city of New Madrid. And you saw places like the New Madrid County School District having to slash their budget and fire teachers and stuff just because all the money was gone, right? The governor at the time, Eric Greitens, called a special session and just straight up told them, I'm not letting you leave this special session until he basically said it was fixed. I don't remember if he specifically said until you give them a tax break and reopen it, but basically until it's fixed. You can go back and look at exactly what his demands were, but essentially his ability to call a special session to say, hey, I know you guys are home on break, but you're coming back and you're not leaving until it's accomplished, whatever that is. That's a pretty big power that they have over the legislative branch. Now, he could call a special session and they could choose to pass a resolution saying, forget you, we're going home. But he could just call them immediately back for another special session. So usually they'll end up passing something. They'll get something done. Once again, that's something we talked about last unit a little bit. Now, the next one is more of the, I should say, I guess, traditional executive part of the executive branch, right? And that is doing the stuff that they just passed into law. He supervises the entire executive branch. So like all the things, all the various parts, all the different departments, all of that comes at the supervision of the governor. It doesn't mean he's in every room, but it means that he is in charge of all of it. So the supervisory part of his role is probably one of the largest things that he does, is looking after all of these different parts of the executive branch and making sure that they're working properly. Now, the next part is one that we talked about a little bit earlier on in this unit, and that is that he has the power to appoint people, right? So he can select people for various positions, including two of the departments where he can just straight up say, that guy, and that guy, because I like him, right? That's when we talked about the merit system. That's, well, it's the merit system, and then the where's it at? Patronage system. See, even I have to study. But anyway, so the merit system and the patronage system, appointing people within the patronage system, he can just straight up pick whoever he wants. But he also gets to appoint people to things like the judicial branch. So he can make recommendations for what judges should be picked and things like that. He also then has the power to remove people within the executive branch, just straight up like, you're gone, as long as it is one of the areas that he has patronage power over. The last one has a fancy word in it, but it's relatively simple. He is a liaison to the national government. So what that means is if President Trump wants to know what's going on in Missouri, there's some kind of crisis that has happened in Missouri. Think like the flood in 2011. Was it that long ago? Anyway, the big flood where they blew the levee and all that kind of stuff. The president, who of course at the time was Obama, would have called the governor, who at the time was maybe Blunt, maybe I have to go back and check, but and just basically said like, hey, what help do you need? What's going on? They wouldn't call, you know, like the president isn't calling the New Madrid County commissioners and asking. They're calling the governor. If there's something that the state really needs and the federal government needs to get involved, then, and we're talking the federal government's executive branch here, then the governor will be the one who actually goes to Washington, D.C. a lot of times, or picks up the phone and calls and says, hey, we need this stuff. Here's what's going on in our state, right? So the liaison with the U.S. government just means that they represent us at the federal level to the executive branch. Remember, we have the two senators and 8 representatives who also represent us at the federal level, but they represent us in the legislative branch, whereas he's liaison to the executive. All right. Next one is the judicial powers of the governor. These are fun. We will get in more depth on these when we get to the actual judicial branch, but for right now, you need to know the basics. So I'll explain the basics. One of the powers that the governor has that is considered judicial is the power to pardon anyone. Like anybody. Meaning, if there is someone who commits a state crime, now, okay, when I say anyone, he can't pardon federal crimes, right? If you are in trouble with the feds, the only person who can pardon you is the president. But if you are in trouble with the state government, then he has the power to pardon you. So let's say that you get a speeding ticket on the highway, right? You're going 400 miles an hour in a 50, right? The governor could just say, nah, he's good, and wipe it from your record. You could be guilty of murder. Governor could just be like, nah, let him go. Pardoned. Now, would he? Probably not, because if he was abusing this power, it would probably end up leading to an impeachment, which we've already talked about, right? You know, if he had people like stealing stuff for him, and then he was just like, oh, thanks for the stuff, you're pardoned, right? That's shady enough that probably the legislative branch would get involved in an attempt to impeach him. But yeah, he can pardon anybody. He can just, you're good. See ya. Next up is the ability to reprieve. Now, reprieve is similar. A reprieve is when the punishment still exists. So let's say that you are guilty of manslaughter and you're going to serve 10 years in prison for it, right? If that occurs, but let's say you are the mother of 5 and you're a single mom, right? He might say, hey, I'm going to grant you a reprieve. You still have to serve your 10 years, but I'm going to give you a year before that 10-year span starts, so that in that year, you can figure out where your kids are going to stay and all that kind of stuff and get things set up. And then at the end of that reprieve, that 1 year or whatever time he sets, then you serve your sentence. Now, the kind of back end version of that is called a commutation. If you commute someone's sentence, that means you take time off the end of it. So if that same mom has a 10-year sentence, but she's been out of her kids' lives for 5 years as this thing fought through the courts, then the governor can look at it and say, you've been in custody for 5 years, you've been away from your kids for 5 years, I'm going to commute your sentence and say that it is only going to be a 5-year sentence, and then count those 5 years that you've been in state custody as your 5 years, right? So he's not saying this is gone from your record. What he's saying is that your time that you have to serve is shortened, essentially. So lessening the penalty, not removing it from your record. If you're pardoned, it's gone from your record. It's just gone. It's like it never happened in the legal code. If you are getting a reprieve, it just means you can take a space between when you're actually sentenced and when you actually have to serve the sentence. In a commutation, you're taking that sentence and you're saying less sentence. But both of those, reprieve and commutation, it stays on your record. The last one is one that I've seen most recently with the what's his name? Rittenhouse, I believe is his name. The Rittenhouse case, where the individual went up and ended up shooting and killing 2 people at a protest. And there's a whole argument over whether it was self-defense or whether it was an attack, whether he's a murderer or whatever, all these things. That happened up in Wisconsin, and I think he was from Illinois. And so he had to be extradited. What that means is that the governor of Illinois gets a phone call from Wisconsin. And the governor of Wisconsin goes, hey, we want that guy to come up here and be tried in court, even though he lives in your state. We want to try him under our state law. And the governor of Illinois can then go, well, not personally, but he can send the police to go arrest that individual and transport them to the other state. So in this case, Kyle Rittenhouse was arrested in Illinois, even though he hadn't committed any crimes in Illinois. And he was then exported or extradited to the state where he committed the crimes so that they could put him in court there. That's what extradition is. Next up is another, I guess, one that we tend to assume, or we tend to know. He is the head of the military for the state. Now, important to understand here, when we say he's the head of the military for the state, that doesn't mean like the Air Force bases in Missouri are under the command of our governor, because the Air Force is a federal agency. It's part of the executive branch at the national level. The state level would actually be the National Guard. So he's the head of the Missouri National Guard. That's why when the flood in 2011 occurred, when the rioting surrounding the Ferguson, I believe that was Mike Brown shooting, and all of the riots were happening in Ferguson, that's why the governor can say, all right, National Guard, go, help, figure it out. Because he's their commander-in-chief. He's in charge of what they do. Now, in reality, he's not commanding them day to day, right? He can give them big directives, but what he does is appoints a commander who actually runs the whole thing. So there's actually going to be an officer who is telling them the basics and the day-to-day stuff, even though technically the commander-in-chief is the governor who can then give them big directives. He's not going and saying like, Bob, grab your gun and go over there, right? Last but not least, the most fun. And this is the part of the governorship that I would enjoy the most. So if you view all of these as the administrative hat and the legislative hat and the judicial hat and the military hat, right, that he can switch out. Oh, I'm a legislator now. Oh, I'm an administrator now. Oh, I'm the head of the military now. This is my favorite hat. And that is the symbol of the state. So why is that my favorite? Well, it's because it's all of the ceremonial stuff, all the like fancy schmancy governor things, right? So this is why he gets to stay in the fancy governor's mansion, right? This is why he gets the ceremonial roles of the governor. So let's say, let's say that someone very important internationally is coming to the state. So let's say the Pope shows up, right? The person who's going to greet them formally to the state of Missouri is the governor. Let's say that a foreign dignitary, some, I don't really know who would visit Missouri, no offense to us, but let's say that we have the Queen of England come by. I don't know, once again, don't know why she'd be in Missouri, but let's say that she did. She is a foreign head of state. She would be greeted at some point by the president, right? But if she came into Missouri, she would meet with the governor, who would be like, welcome to Missouri. Here, have like some Missouri things as a token of our friendship, right? All of those ceremonial interactions are going to be the governor. But the real kicker, my favorite part out of all of this, is that he has the power to proclaim statewide special days. Meaning, the governor literally can declare a holiday. Like he can just declare it. So like I could say, I hereby declare that tomorrow is statewide hot dog day. Everyone gets the day off. And guess what? They do. I would have way too much fun with that. Way too much fun. Because, you know, like once or twice a week, we would just have some special declared day. I'd just have to have somebody keep track of it for me, so I didn't reuse days. But yeah, I hereby declare today, I stayed up too late watching football yesterday day. Go home, right? He just has basically unlimited power to declare days. Now, I guess, once again, if he got crazy with it, if he actually started acting stupid with it, then the legislative branch could step in and sanction him. They could step in and be like, okay, you got to stop doing this, and threaten impeachment or something. But so much fun to be had with special days. Last but not least, it's kind of the no duh. He is the leader of the state. If there's anything where the state of Missouri must speak, it's going to be the governor, right? According to the governor of the state of Missouri, yada, yada, yada about Missouri. That's why he is the person that you'll see during like coronavirus stuff or things like that, that people will default to what the governor says about the state as what is happening in the state, because it's his job to be the mouthpiece and leader of the state. So you see all of these different things, all the different powers and jobs that the governor has. Hopefully, you were able to come across all of these things on your own as you went through the deal assigned last week, where you looked at the responsibilities of everybody. But today, what I need you to do is in the comment section of this, the answer section, that's what I'm looking for. In the answer section to this, I want you to tell me, of all of these, well, first off, if you have any questions, ask them there. But then I want you to tell me, of all of these, which would be your favorite power of the governor? Like, which one would you want to be able to have that power the most? And of these powers of the governor, which one would you not actually want to have to do as governor? So which one would you want to do the most? Which one would you not want to do? To end us off, if I get a bullseye, you all get 5 extra credit points. Nope, I got an 11. Sorry, tough luck. Better luck next time. Now I gotta figure out how to close this, so you all get to stare at my face for a half second longer.